Hi, and welcome to the 40% Better podcast. I'm really excited. Today's guest, Felix, who I found by random chance, lucky chance, on LinkedIn. He helps introverts get back in control of their lives and get self-confidence and move ahead in the world. And to me, that's an incredibly powerful mission because I'm a recovering introvert and I used to struggle with social anxiety. And so the work that he's doing, I find fascinating. And I think it's really empowering for people who, like I used to, really struggle with being introverts. Without further ado, here's Felix, the broke surgeon.
I'm really glad that we get to talk because you totally sparked my curiosity when you talked about helping introverts because I'm a recovering introvert. Um, I spent decades as a shy introvert. I had really bad social anxiety, and the way that I unwound that worked well for me. But I don't know that it's something that works well for everybody else. And because a lot of the stuff that I do is about hacking people's heads, anybody who has done anything in that space, I'm always curious, like, how did you what how did you do it? Like,
Yeah.
what is the you're doing, and is it the same as something I've done, or is it completely different? So really what I think the starting point is, what's the backstory like? How did you get into hacking people's heads to get them out of
Uh,
it being introverts?
yeah. So using your wording here, your vocabulary, I started out by hacking people's bodies. So I'm
Okay.
actually right. So actually a trauma surgeon by training. So I've been in medicine now for I got my medical degree in 2010. So it'll be almost 14 years that I've
Mhm.
been a medical doctor. And I was never in love with medicine. And especially over the last few years, I found what I was doing was mostly related to helping insurance companies make more profits, not pay out, not provide the care that patients deserve and desire. The systems I was working for, it was really more my work, my day-to-day work was really more designed to help them build the patient, and I wasn't really helping people. I was really just helping systems and insurance companies increase their profit margin, but I wasn't really able to help people. And uh, like I said, I was never in love with medicine, so I really wasn't in the mindset of trying to figure out how can I make this work for me. And I discovered coaching 2022 for myself, and
Hmm.
that's a bit of a long story as well. But once I discovered coaching and what that did for me, I realized that's a fantastic way that I can now turn around and actually help people. And once I started coaching myself and having a profound impact on people's lives, sometimes in very short amounts of time, in ways that I was never really able to help people in medicine the way I had intended to. It was sort of a no-brainer for me to say, well, I never really liked medicine to begin with. I wasn't in love with it because it wasn't my first choice in career anyways. And now I found a much better way to help people have a much more profound impact on their lives, able to spend time with them, right? My 15-minute clinic visits, 80% of that time was spent away hacking away the keyboard to create documentation. Only 20% was spent with a patient. But here now I can spend, in my one-on-one sessions, 45 minutes to an hour with a patient just talking. Well, not a patient, but a client, just talking and really getting to know them and understand them and
Hmm.
help them in ways that really works. And so once I discovered coaching and what it does for me and what I've been able to do in that space, it was a no-brainer for me to make that transition to say, all right, I'm leaving medicine because this is really the space where I can really shine and help people.
That is awesome. How did the whole introvert thing come? Like, that is not a I rarely hear people talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a terrific question, and I came upon that really somewhat fortuitously. It was kind of a just luck, I should say. Um, the two things that I discovered throughout my own journey of self discovery, which took me way longer than I care to admit, but what I discovered is I'm an introvert. And most of the clients that I've had over my last year of being in the coaching sphere have also been introverts. And I saw this common theme across all the things that I was doing with them and for myself. And that's just how I ended up in that space. And what's really fascinating is I have now connected with other people who are also working with introverts, and there's not many of us out there. I'll agree with you on that. It's definitely a sort of an oddball thing, if you will, but there's a lot of introverts in this world. And one thing that the deeper I dive into introverts, the more I think these people really make the best kinds of leaders. And one thing that we really need in this world is better leaders. And so what I want to do is, right, I want to make the world a better place for all of us. And that will require better leaders. Who are the best leaders? Introverts. Well, if I want to make the world a better place for all of us, well, I should work with introverts who make the best leaders. And really what it takes for introverts to become the leaders that they're really meant to be is a lot of confidence, a lot of coaching, a lot of self-work, and that's the stuff that I do, right? And so it was kind of, like I said, a bit of fortuitous event where my discovery for myself, my discovery in my clients, and even my discovery of what introversion really is and what it can do with those overlap, that I was like, you know what, this is actually kind of exciting, and I want to be in that space. And so here I am now.
Very cool. Okay, I want to deep dive on something because it's where I work. Is you made a comment about introverts make really good leaders. Can you expand on that a bit?
Oh, absolutely. So I think a good way to look at it is, let's say you're in a meeting, right? At a work, board meeting, company meeting, whatever. And, there's always an agenda of some sort, and somebody is presenting and going through the agenda line one by one. And there's always question, obviously, in that meeting that everybody wants to have input on, well, what are the next steps? How can we do this better? Or how should we approach this problem? And, in your mind, now this is a bit of an analogy or a metaphor, so I'm this is probably a bit overly exaggerated, but who's going to speak up first? The extroverts. They're going to come right out and become, boisterous and be like, all right, this is what we're going to do. Whereas the introverts in that meeting are stereotypically, not all of them, but stereotypically are going to be more reserved. They're going to be quiet and just take in the room, take in what everyone else is saying. And really the idea behind it is introverts don't like to pull attention onto them, right? So anything that creates attention on them, creates anxiety. It creates a bit of a scary environment where they don't want that attention on them for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's fear of failure, or they've been burned by something in the past, but they don't want that attention on them. So as a result, the two things that introverts are going to do is, one is they're going to try to shine the spotlight on everyone else in the room instead. And that's the sign of a good leader, right? A good leader doesn't take credit for the work. A good leader gives credit to the people who made the work happen, right? So introverts are naturally, intuitively already doing that. They're giving credit to the people who are doing the actual work. But the other part of that is, as introverts, because we don't want to shine the spotlight on us, we're going to think this problem through thoroughly and come up with a plan that is less bound to fail. Because if it fails, it's going to shine the spotlight back on us. So we're going to want to put a plan together that doesn't fail. So as a result, introverts make fantastic leaders because we're going to come up with a solid plan that is less bound to fail, and we're going to make sure everyone else in the room gets the spotlight shined on them and not on us. And so they're in the background, working their magic. And that, I think this is really where introverts make the best leaders, because they don't want that spotlight shined on them. They really want to give credit where credit is due, and they want to create plans that are less bound to fail.
That's really interesting. How do you get them? So I've worked with a bunch of introverts in the past, and I've had some really fascinating experiences with getting them out of their shells, right? To like actually be able to contribute effectively. When somebody is really shy and introverted like that, if they're so shy and introverted that it's hard for them to speak up and contribute in those meetings, what do you do?
The thing to recognize is that you don't have to speak up in these meetings. There's, the meeting is just where everybody comes together in the room, but there's still a lot of decisions and a lot of actions. Actually, most of the decisions and most of the actions don't happen in that room, right? So there's ways to do that, to convey your message in ways that are not involved in that room in front of other people. But
okay.
Right, that's just from a pure logistical standpoint. But also, introversion is a spectrum. So there's going to be some people who are very much on the shy and reserved spectrum. There's some people who are closer to the extroversion spectrum, and that's probably where I fall, and maybe you have as well in the past, where we are okay with speaking up, we are okay with contributing. We're just not the first to speak. And so it really depends on the person. And for me, it's a very individualized approach. I mean, I have a program that's designed to kind of go through the basic steps to go from A to Z, from the beginning to the end, but everybody starts at a different level. Right. And so depending on where each person is and the situations they're facing, I do try to tailor the individual approach to each one of my clients. But just to give you a little bit of an overview, what that looks like, the first step for any introvert, or really for any person, is to recognize your own strengths. What are you actually really good at? And for you to be able to understand that those really are your strengths. Those are the things that you really are good at. Those are your passions. Those are the things you can talk about for hours. Some introverts have topics that they can talk about for hours. Maybe not necessarily the stuff that we're talking about at work, but there are things that they love to talk about. Maybe it's flowers, maybe it's video games, maybe it's elephants. I don't know, but everybody has some topic that they're really passionate about that they can talk about with others for hours on end. And so the first step is always going to be recognizing your own strengths. Once we have that, once we know what we're made of, and that's part of that self-discovery that realistically we all need to go through, right? Like, who are we? What are we made of? What are we meant to do in this world? So we have to recognize our own strengths. Then we got to utilize those strengths to build upon. The next thing, so it's called the Rise Above program, RISE, Rise, and the first R is obviously recognize your strengths. The next step then is igniting confidence, right? Because now we need to know that we can do something, and that sometimes takes baby steps. That really just sometimes takes absolute baby steps. And actually, it's one of the examples of one of the things I put together is a networking bingo. So it's a challenge to yourself. You want to create, it's a bingo grid with activities that you do in the real world. And it could be something as simple as saying hello to the person in front of you at the coffee shop, right? That is maybe uncomfortable to you at first, but it makes you realize once you do it, oh, that actually wasn't so hard. So you have to ignite that confidence. And like I said, every introvert is different. They're on a different level on the spectrum. And so it depends on where they're at, where we're going to push the boundaries a little bit. But we have to ignite the confidence that they're actually able to do things that they may not have the ability to do right now, or think they don't, but they actually can. The third step then is sharing your powers through leadership. That's now when we actually get into the leadership component, right? Once you have the ability to know what your strengths are and the confidence to act upon them, well, now we want to share those powers that you have through leadership. Now we want to engage others in making sure that our projects move forward, our lives move forward, whatever scenario that the people in, whether that's at work, in their own lives, at church, whatever it is, right? So we want to share through leadership. And then finally, and this is the last part, and that's why it's the fourth one, is engage in networking. Networking is so important to our lives, right? To our success in life, whether that's personally or in business, especially. But we need to be able to engage with other people, and that's really hard for many introverts. So that's why engage is last, because we need to recognize our strengths and build confidence and have some actions that we've already been able to do under our belt to know that maybe we can do, and maybe we can network and meet other people and engage with others, even if it is draining us of energy, right? I mean, to me, still, I have these incredible conversations for my podcast, just absolutely amazing conversations with people that I barely know. We go deep. We really get to understand the person on the other end, just like you and I are doing here. But what people don't get to see is the amount of recovery that I do after these conversations. As much fun as I'm having, and as really engaging as the conversations are, it drains me so much. But you don't get to see that on the podcast, right? You watch these episodes and you think, I'm just having a good time getting to know people and conversing with them. But there's a recovery period afterwards. And so that's the part that we have to build into self-care and recovery with these networking events. And so that's really my approach, right? Going through this Rise Above program to build confidence and to be able to share your leadership and engage with others through networking. But how everyone goes through is, I have, like I said, a rough outline for everyone, but everybody starts at a different point. And everybody has different goals in life. So I do try to tailor it individually to each client to really maximize the outcomes for each and every one of them.
Oh, that is awesome. Okay. So it's really interesting that you've got the whole talk to somebody at the coffee shop, because my starting point for getting out of my introversion was to go to Starbucks and talk with a barista. That was the first thing. And the way that it happened was a friend of mine, because I networking, right? I'm Silicon Valley engineering geek, and I realized that lack of networking was really hampering my career. And I was talking with a friend about it, and she said, well, let's get you started talking with people. And we worked out this 2-minute thing of go to Starbucks and talk to the barista. and it worked. Like 2 weeks later, I was like, okay, that was really easy, or it's easy now. And I have confidence because I've built up evidence that I can do this. And now what? And then it was literally 5 minute speed networking events that they have here. And then, it's kind of built up. You mentioned something about evidence in there, and do you follow Alex Hormozy at all?
I do. He's definitely an incredible inspiration when it comes to building businesses, mindset,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, he has definitely built a very nice empire for himself. Even his wife, Layla, is fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, they're awesome people. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So he talks about building confidence as an exercise of having a stack of incontrovertible evidence that you can do something, right? And when you're talking about the whole bingo thing, I'm like, oh, that's an evidence exercise that someone's doing, and they're putting in their reps and doing the uncomfortable thing. Yeah, totally. That totally makes sense. I have to ask you, are you taking a nap after this call? Is that part of your
Yes. So I don't know that I'll take a nap, but I'm actually super tired. I just joined a soccer league, and I'm 40 years old, and I play goalie. I got really beat up, and our game didn't start till 9:30 last night, so I didn't get home till almost 11. And so I am exhausted today. My ankles are killing me right now. My shoulders are aching. So, besides this call, yes, I do. Today is my rest and recovery day, period.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of naps. Like for me,
Yes.
that the uh, non-sleep deep rest protocol. Do you follow Andrew Huberman at all?
Oh yeah, he's a fantastic
Yeah.
scientist, and the way he presents information, and I'm a scientist at heart too. I come from a family of scientists, and so part of me is data driven. I especially through coaching now, there's a lot more intuition that I'm trying to build into my own decision making. But no, I love Huberman. His content is phenomenal.
Yeah, his whole NSDR thing. I had started doing like 15-minute naps years ago, and had no idea what, like, it just worked for me. And then a couple of years ago, I think, when he started talking about NSDR and how the neurological reset for taking a short nap, I was like, oh, that's why that works. Now I can say there's science behind why I'm like, okay, I'm checking out for the next 15 minutes.
Right.
Yeah, that's my recovery. I'll be taking a nap later on today because
Yeah.
it's always part of the game.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And the big thing there too is you don't want to. I know the science always shows this as well, and Huberman has talked about this, but you don't want to take an hour long nap. I mean, especially with NSDR, really the idea is keeping it short. And from personal experience, I absolutely agree with that. If I take an hour long nap, yes, I may feel a little rested, but I don't feel as rested as when I do it a little shorter, 20, 30 minutes or something, right? For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just the other thing I wanted to mention on the baby steps, on the building confidence thing, with the networking bingo, for example, there's five pieces in a row or in a column or across, and I've set the grid up in a way that there's 5 different levels of activities in each dimension. So right, so you go from easy to hard, and you could choose obviously which order you want to go in, but the idea is that there's one really easy thing, right? Like say hello to someone in public wearing the same color shirt as you. But then it also goes all the way to the extreme where you want to ask someone which actor should play you in a drama depicting your life and why. And so that ends up now sparking maybe a longer conversation that may be a little harder to do. And so the grid really is set up based on those baby steps that you mentioned. You go from something easy to something hard, but each time you build up on it in a way that, oh, that wasn't so hard. I can do that. Let's try doing the next level, right?
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of baby steps, and in looking back at my own journey, I realized that all I did was stack up little tiny baby steps that never they rarely felt like I was doing something like huge. It was always, oh, I just did this little thing, and people had asked me like, how did you make that happen? I'm like, I just did this little thing, but it was a little thing on top of a bunch of other little things. And that's the fact that I started doing the baby steps to begin with is what allowed that whole progression. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's
I mean, if Yeah, no, I mean, if you think about it, even like parachuters, right? I mean, it's pretty insane to me to jump out of a perfectly good airplane.
Right.
But you don't start there, right? You start on the ground. You learn how the parachute is rigged. You learn how the safety harnesses work. Maybe you just jump, 3 feet from a step to learn how to land. Then you do some dry jumps on the ground, right? You build yourself up to the point where now you can actually jump out of a perfectly good airplane, right? It's an extreme example, but with anything in life, you start with the basics and you work yourself up to something bigger. It's the same thing here.
Yeah. We use analogies all the time, and we use swimming and math because they're both built on baby steps, right? Like you don't start off swimming butterfly like Michael Phelps,
Yeah.
but Michael Phelps started off by holding his breath in the water, just like everybody else does, right?
Right.
And it's a bunch of little baby steps. And in math, you start off learning numbers, and then 1+1 is 2, right? And then you build on that, and one day you're doing calculus.
Yeah. Right.
No, but and people because it's such a gradual progression, people don't usually recognize and remember, oh yeah, there was a point in time when I had no idea what geometry was, right? And I couldn't understand Pythagorean theorem, right?
Right.
And now they're like, they just do it automatically, especially if they're carpenters, they're like,
Right.
oh yeah, I've got this thing and I'm doing all the angles and away I go. So yeah, that's interesting. That's cool. I like that. Um, you gave me a ton of if nothing else, corroboration um, of somebody else who is solving the same kind of a problem and seeing the same kinds of things and using very, very similar methodologies. And I don't really think so much of, we teach people how to be great leaders. And along the way, there's this unconscious, it doesn't really matter whether you're an introvert or extrovert. You still need to be able to listen to your people, and you still need to be able to understand the mental model of helping everybody else be more successful in
Right.
whatever it is you're working on. And whether it doesn't matter to me whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. If you're an extrovert, you may need to control yourself, right, and not speak up. And if you're an introvert, you may have to recognize that you do need to speak up a little bit and not just sit there quietly being unwilling to speak your ideas. And I've certainly had that on, in my teams, where I had to get people out of that fear of criticism.
Yeah.
And get them comfortable speaking up. But it's the same, it's the same kind of context of everything. I really like that. That's very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about it, authority is earned, but leadership is learned. So anybody can learn good leadership.
Yep.
But authority is just the title that you get, right? But
right.
On the leadership side of things, the way I look at leadership is through the leadership KPIs. So they're not key performance indicators, but the way I look at leadership is, do the people under your charge know their role, right? That's the K. Do they know their role? Do they know their job? Do they know what they're supposed to be doing? Are they proud of what they're doing? Are they proud of their job? Are they proud of their work, right? So that's the P.
Right.
And the I is, do they feel like they're an integral part of your mission? Because if they don't feel like they're an integral part of your mission, they're not going to be proud of their work. On the other hand, if they are an integral part of the mission, and they know what they're supposed to be doing and they're proud of what they're doing, well, then they're going to be fantastic people. And the only way to make that happen is through your leadership, right? You have to make sure that your people know what they're supposed to be doing, that that they feel like they're an integral part of their mission. That results in them being proud of what it is that they're doing. But this, again, where introverts shine, right? Because introverts take the scene in, and they can really understand people to understand what are their strengths and how can I best utilize that person to make the mission succeed.
Right. It's interesting. One of the things that I've noticed over the years, and talked about authority and titles, is, and I've been doing this for a long time. I always left space in the team for people to change their roles. And I get that in a medical context, you might not be switching out the surgeon for the anesthesiologist.
Right. Yeah.
Might not be swapping those roles. But in software development world, I've had multiple experiences where somebody's working in a role but they want to do something different, and helping them do that, they do become proud of the work they're doing, because they're not so happy in the first context necessarily. They're bored. They've been doing it for 10 years or, whatever it happens to be, right? But giving them the ability and giving them the space in conversations allows them to get that pride back. And when they do that, their productivity level goes through the roof. From a KPI in terms of performance indicators for the company.
Yeah.
When people start getting way more productive because they've got that pride, that I tend to think about ROI. That's such a huge boost to the company when all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, the productivity has gone up so much because these people they're happy, right? And to me, you're talking about the medical industry wanting to make more money, and it's like every team lead should know in the back of their head that that's such a critical part for the business. Is if your team is really productive, you're helping the company make more money, then you have a tremendous amount of power inside the organization.
Exactly.
Versus the team that isn't doing that.
Right.
And from a team lead perspective, I always think about, if I want to get stuff for my team, what is the ability that I have to go talk to executives and get funding for something, right? And if my team's performing really well, they'll give me whatever I want. That seems to always be the case. I just have to go ask and put it in a compelling argument.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. The scene that always comes to mind is from Office Space, where Bill walks up to Peter and goes, yeah, I'm going to need those TPS reports by the end of the day. And, this is a fantastic example, right? Because Peter has no idea what those TPS reports are there for. He's just creating these reports and doesn't know why. But, if Bill had come up to him and say, hey, listen, Peter, I need these TPS reports by the end of the day. Here's why. And make Peter understand that he is an important part of the company, because these TPS reports, as boring as they are to put together, they are an integral part of the mission for the company as a whole to succeed.
Right.
Well, Peter would have a much different approach to writing these TPS reports and getting them done, right? So instead of just saying, I need them, if you're that in that particular scenario, Peter doesn't know why he's even creating these TPS reports. He doesn't know what his job is, right? So he doesn't feel like he's an integral part of the mission. And obviously he's not proud of what he's doing because he doesn't understand his job.
Yeah. That's I guess. I've always taken for granted that my teams always know why we're doing stuff. And I think it's because we've always been working on building new things to solve customer problems. And so I wanted to make sure that the team understood the reason behind whatever it was we were building. Yeah. And so the why was always an integral part of the team conversation, whether I was leading or not. Even if I wasn't lead, like, I wanted someone to tell me why in the world we're building this. What's the point, right? And when I started running my own teams, then that was always a factor, was to get the whys in. And I just took that for granted. I didn't really, it sounds weird, but I just took for granted that was a really critical part of the whole thing, because I couldn't imagine myself operating any other way.
Sure.
And so whenever people had questions, it was always, and if someone had a question that I didn't know what the customer's mental models were, I would go find out. I was like, okay, I'm going to go talk to some people and figure out what that looks like. Yeah. No,
and that is super important. I mean, I'll tell you from my own experience. So I was when I was with the Air Force, I was part of a trauma training unit in St. Louis, and when I first got there, I didn't have a complete understanding of what it is that we're actually trying to do. But I sort of started piecing together the idea that every medical personnel in the Air Force had to go through either our unit in St. Louis or Baltimore every 2 or 3 years in order to be signed off and ready to take care of trauma patients on deployments.
Sure.
But in my 3 years in St. Louis, we had 5 different colonels leading this group. So our leadership in those 3 years changed 5 times. And with each new colonel coming in, I got less, I was more confused about what it is that we're actually trying to do. Because at the same time, the wars in Afghanistan, in the Middle East, were winding down. We had fewer deployments. We're pulling out troops, and there were fewer trauma patients downrange. And so, with all the things that we were doing, or we were tasked to do, every few months the tasking changed a little bit. I was like, what actually are we trying to accomplish here?
Right.
And with every new person coming in, our mission changed a little bit, and it just the waters really muddied. And so that's where I come from, right? Saying, look, your people really need to understand what it is that they're doing and how they are an integral part of the mission to make it succeed. Because otherwise, you're just as confused as I was back then, and didn't really know what it was that you were supposed to be doing, and what you were signing people off on, and why.
It's so fascinating. Different people in different organizations, and not knowing, either you're like, you really know why you're doing it, right? Like you have a very crisp understanding, or you don't understand what's the value proposition,
Yeah.
And that's such a that's so interesting. I just that is such a that the companies run things differently, and those kernels just took for granted that they had some mental model, and you would absorb it by osmosis.
Right.
Hopefully they weren't as confused as you were, right? Like that's the worst case scenarios. Nobody knows why you're doing this, and yeah, that's horrible. I think one of the things that I've noticed is the bigger companies get, Air Force being a very large company,
Right.
Oftentimes the less clarity people have about why things are going on, and
Very true.
And I can see how people get frustrated, and they don't have that pride you're talking about. They're and that impact. They're like, I'm doing these reports. I have no idea why.
Yeah.
No one's ever told me what the value proposition is. That's really, yeah, it's a good point.
But that also comes down to the leadership, right? If the leadership isn't able to communicate clearly and value every single person in the organization for the part that they're playing, that's when you run into these situations. So it comes back to good leadership from the very top to set the tone, to set the expectations, to really ensure that everybody feels loved and valued and appreciated for the whatever little part they have in the organization as a whole.
So that's interesting. So I have a different philosophy on that. I think that the highest leverage is the first level team leads. And actually, one of the first CEOs that I worked for actually told me this, and it was a fairly small company. There was like, I don't know, 300 people in the company, something like that. But he told me like straight up that I had more power in the company than he did, because on a day-to-day basis, I was managing the people that moved the needle. And he was, even though we had a fairly flat org structure, he was too removed, and that he saw anything that I was doing as being more important than anything he was doing, because he didn't move the needle on a day-to-day basis.
But yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. But that comes from your CEO having sufficient leadership capabilities to recognize your strengths as that local leader, right? So if that isn't communicated clearly, that's saying, listen, Bill, you're more important to this company, right? I mean, how would it feel to you if that CEO came to you and said, Bill, listen, I'm the CEO, I call the shots, you can't do anything in this company without me knowing about it. Very different, all of a sudden, a very different culture in that organization, right? But if that CEO says, no, Bill, listen, on a tactical level, you know more about what needs to happen, so you call the shots. But on a strategic level, for the big picture, you don't know all the other parts that are going on. I need to keep that strategic level oversight. So I will work on the big strategy while you work on the little tactics. That is good leadership. That's how it should be.
Yeah. And it's I don't know if those folks that are at the high level can understand that. I mean, the data is that they don't understand it very well, just because the volume of engaged employees is so low the statistics are anywhere from 15 to 25% of your workforce is actually engaged,
Right.
which is a horribly low number. Like every time I see one of those reports, I'm like, oh my God, like that's just that means you're paying all these people who are seriously not happy at work. And it's an anchor on your productivity. There's just no way around it. And what is the message that leadership has got, to your point, top down, about people being empowered and being proud of the work they're doing, or not, right? That's the flip side, is where's the not part of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard those. Well, no, that's true. That's true. But it is a fascinating topic. I mean, I've heard those same statistics, and it's not even just that, about 15% of the people are engaged. It's the other part of that too is, and it depends on the organization, that only 15% of the work that is being done is actually producing the forward momentum that the company is looking for, right? And so now, what do you do about the other 85%, either people or work that is being done? And I feel like nowadays I can relate to this from a medical world, for example. Like I said, most of my notes, most of my documentation, either was purely in the note for billing, it had nothing to do with patient care, or for liability purposes. And so there's so many people that are saying, and I will even say that probably 99% of the documentation that is generated in healthcare right now never gets looked at again. It just goes into the void, and no one will ever set aside on those notes again. So, there's a lot of people who are saying, well, we're just going to have AI generate all that documentation to ease the burden on the doctors. I'm like, well, if that's the case, if we have a computer generate all that documentation so that we have the documentation and no one ever looks at it again, why are we generating it in the first place?
Right.
There's no point, right? There's no point. It's fluff. And it's the same thing to your argument, right? So if you're looking at 80, 85% of the work that we do doesn't actually move the needle forward, why are we doing it?
Right. No, 100%. Yeah. It's funny you're talking about the notes, because my partner works in mental health, and every time she's doing patient work, her complaint about notes is, I'm just doing this for the billing. Like I'm doing all this stuff and it's only for billing. I can't believe it. And, I swear she spends more time on notes than she does, patient. I mean, earlier you were talking about 80% of your 15 minutes is documentation and 20% is just the patient. I'm like, it feels like that's what she says is the exact same thing. And that's so disturbing and sad. I'm like, yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I like startups so much, is because in startups, you've got a really clear understanding of the why, and you really understand how your work helps move the needle. And there's not, because it's such a small ecosystem, nobody gets to hide, right? If you're not being productive, the whole team recognizes it. They're like, Felix, what have you been doing? We gave you this thing and nothing's going on, right? And they tend to be, the smaller size tend to be a lot tighter about, everybody knows what's going on, and it's much easier to manage. And I don't know what where the company size is where that goes away. But my experience has been that the smaller the company, the better that works. Yeah.
I think you're right. There's definitely some critical mass with the number of employees you have in the organization. But that's also not a guaranteed tipping point either. I mean, take NVIDIA, for example. I think NVIDIA is a fantastic example of good leadership. I mean, Jensen Huang, I don't know if you know much about how he runs the company, but he invites every single employee to send him feedback on what works, what doesn't work. And so, I mean, he gets hundreds of emails a day, and he says, look, keep it short because I have all these emails that I need to look at. But he truly is invested in every single employee in his company, which is what, like thousands of people, right? And the company is flourishing because he still has, he makes sure everyone knows their role. They're an integral part of the mission. They're proud of what they're doing, and he wants that feedback from everybody, right? So it's really depend. I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier. It really depends on the top-down leadership to set the tone in the company.
Sure.
And I agree with you. For the most part, there seems to be some tipping point where you go from small to medium or large, where the picture gets hazy for a lot of people with, well, what is it that I'm actually doing? And then you also run into the problem that some positions get grandfathered in over time because they've been there since the beginning. The company itself, the organizational structure has changed, the mission has changed, what they're producing has changed. But there's one person has been there for 20 years doing the same thing. Even though that one thing hasn't really changed anything, the big picture of the company, it's really hard to revisit some of these little things in the company sometimes to really clear the cobwebs out to say, all right, what is it that we actually need to do? And that's, I think, how we end up with these situations where only 15% of the work people do actually moves the needle.
Right. Yeah. And if you don't have the folks on the top really focused on everybody understanding what it is and why they're doing it, because that's just not part of their mindset.
Right.
One of the things I just thought about was, like, I was thinking in the background, I'm like, why wouldn't they be focused on that? And so I spent a little bit of time at Google, and one of the things that really disturbed me when I was there, I heard a product manager tell me that she never talked to customers because it wasn't scalable. And I thought, oh my God, that's, because my world before that had been either startups or much smaller sized companies. And I was like, well, then how do you actually understand the marketplace?
Right.
And just before that, she'd been telling me how they had this problem where they kept releasing new features and they got no adoption. And I'm like, wait a minute, you got this data point that you're releasing new stuff to help the customers and they're not adopting it, but you're never talking to them. Like, can you put two and two together? Like, you understand the pattern, How could you be missing out on this thing? And because, my mental model was always talk to the customers, because especially in a startup world, you have to do that. And I was just like, and I heard versions of that. Oh, you can't scale it so many times when I was there. And I was like, I don't like, fundamentally, I don't think that's a good idea. And now when Google's laying off all these people, I'm like, maybe that's partly why, is that they've got all these people that are just looking at the problem from completely the wrong direction. And that's if the CEO is only thinking about scale and doesn't say talk to the customers, then from the top down, you just have the wrong mental models.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah,
I,
fascinating.
And I mean, I had those same things about Google recently myself. And if anything, it goes back to even what we were just saying a few minutes ago. Only 50% of the work people do actually makes any difference. And so looking at all these layoffs at Google or any other company that's been going through that recently, that's really it. You're trying to scale, and especially as Google grew and added all these different services and added all these different projects. They were just trying to play around and see what works, and unfortunately without a lot of customer feedback. But that's also, I think, one of the reasons that Google has been, I mean, the big thing with Google products is, they have something out for 2 or 3 years and then they just drop it. It just goes away.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, you could have built something really awesome if you adopted it the right way. I mean, I think that the biggest thing that I think people still miss from Google is Inbox, right? Inbox was the way to, completely revolutionized your email inbox. It was a fantastic service. I loved it. Most people loved it. And they said, nah, we're going to go away with that. We're going to go back to a good old Gmail. And it's really a shame to see a large company like that fail at really cool ideas and really cool products and really innovative ways for us to interact with the world. But yeah, I think it goes back to what you were saying, market research, right? You got to know what your customers want. You got to listen to them. Yeah.
It's interesting because cycling back the whole introvert thing, I wonder, and I didn't think about this at the time, I wonder if the reason those people are afraid to talk to customers is because they're introverts and they're not comfortable in that context, right? Like,
yeah,
I think, being in the startup world, I didn't have a choice, right? Like, I had to go talk to customers because I had to figure out products and solutions and how to make that stuff work. I didn't have an opportunity to just like there was no data. Like I couldn't, there was no way I could magic up a solution to something because there was no inputs, right? We're inventing stuff that hadn't been invented. And so, I wonder if those people, if they got out of that introverted, because there's a ton of introverts in the technology world, people just kind of take it for granted.
Yeah.
Um, and I wonder if they would approach things differently if they got out of that headspace, like the sales team talks to customers,
Right.
but people don't go from sales into product management usually. Like that's not, it's much more common for people to go from engineering to product management. Um, and and the and so and people in engineering tend to get there because they're introverts. They don't want to spend a lot of time talking with people. That's a really common mental model, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think that's a huge component. I think you're right. There are definitely a ton of introverts in the software and technology world because it's comfortable to be by yourself in front of a computer and not have to interact with real people, right? I mean, that's the comfort zone.
Yeah.
And having to go out and talk to people and ask questions, maybe even uncomfortable questions, right?
Right.
What even asking a question like, "Hey, we have this awesome product. What do you not like about it?" Right? That can feel personally insulting if you hear things that people don't like about your product. So yeah, I think that's a huge component. I think you're right. I think you're definitely onto something.
Hmm. Yeah, that's such a fascinating, the way all these pieces work together is just, I'm always like, oh wait, there's a whole other layer here,
Yeah.
or there's some other angle that I hadn't thought about. I'm like, oh yeah, I just completely was blind to that. That's interesting. I didn't notice it. This
Right.
Okay, so we're running out of time. Because I only booked an hour of your time and I don't want to burn up all your energy and you need to go rest and recover from your
Yes.
soccer. And I'm a huge fan of recovery time, so I'm not going to mess you up. How can people get a hold of you? What's all your contact info? And I will put it in the show notes.
Yeah, so the easiest way to connect with me on any of the socials is my link tree, which can be found at brokesurgeon.com. Brokesurgeon.com. That links to my website, all my socials. I'm most active on LinkedIn. So if you just Google Google or LinkedIn my name, you'll be able to find me there. Obviously, my website, successvalue.co, but that's all on my link tree. So brokesurgeon.com will get you probably the easiest way to find me.
Is it broke is in BROKE?
Yes. Yeah. I came up with that. I was going through like trying to figure out, and I wanted to do broken surgeon because I felt like I was broken. I didn't really fit in with the surgical world. I was like, I'm not really the stereotypical surgeon the way I even talk to patients and approach things because I wanted to talk to my patients. And it was right around the time that the word woke was very popular. And
Yeah.
so I ended up combining woke and broken and it turned into broke. And so that's where broke surgeon came from.
Got it. Okay, I like it. Very cool. Thank you for your time. This has been awesome. I've learned a bunch, and I hope the audience has also. Yeah, this has been super cool.
Yeah, I had a ton of time. Thanks for inviting me, Bill. This has
Oh
been
yeah, no,
a fascinating conversation. Yeah.
No, it's. I love it when I can talk with people who their mental, like they've had similar but different experiences, and we can talk about the same stuff, and they don't look at me like I've got three heads. You know. So thank you. I appreciate your familiarity with the world. Yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
No, really, thank you. It's been wonderful conversation. So yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bill.
Cool. Thank you. We'll talk to you soon. Stop recording.